Hello and welcome to this channel. I will start with a confession. For at least a decade now I've tried to make my peace with the system and to moderate my political views. In my youth I used to be a political reactionary and a social conservative. Discovering libertarian individualism while studying political science, I started to reconsider somewhat my instinctive aversion towards classical liberalism. This ended sharply with the rise of the gay liberation movement, the systematic destruction of the power balance in the Middle East by Western liberal democracies in the name of liberal democracy, and the subsequent invasion of Europe by masses of people supposedly from these destabilized countries. When we had the debate in my country around the decriminalization of homosexuality, I was all for this measure, and still am. After some time, however, some strange news started to filter out from the Western countries, especially from the US. There was talk about some curious new rights for people. This in itself was not a great cause of concern, at least not for me. I was still the partisan of a live and let live policy, hoping that we should just find a way to coexist. After all, if we Catholics agreed to address Anglican bishops, who, according to our sacramental theology, are mere laymen without any episcopacy, with the title of bishop, we could call homosexual marriage a marriage out of deference for our adversaries. How wrong I was. What became a great cause of concern for me was the willingness of progressives to use force to silence and shame into submission their opponents. I started at one point to gather news articles about such cases of political and social abuse. Peaceful coexistence was not possible after all. Only our total submission would suffice to these progressives, and a live and let live attitude became an illusion. Right now in Romania we had the opening salvos of the war to normalize deviant sexuality. But this time, with the experience of yesteryear, I will not be fooled again. They fooled me once with talk about tolerance because libertarian individualism left me exposed to their tactics. In the same time, the liberal democracies of the West were working tirelessly to overthrow secular dictators in the Middle East, with the promise that their countries will become pro-Western liberal democracies in turn. Watching in the news the same mistakes being made in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and Syria, my only question was, are these Western leaders and their enablers in the media stupid or evil? And never for a moment was it lost on me that what these Western elites were doing was done in the name of Western-style liberal democracy. Ever since my country left behind communism at the end of 1989, I heard over and over again the arguments for a Western-style liberal democracy. On the one hand, I was being told that only in a Western-style democracy do you have the necessary levers to solve social conflicts through dialogue instead of violence. And on the other hand, I was being told that these democracies are peaceful by their nature. Watching the way gay rights proponents were behaving, I lost faith in the first line of argument. Watching the deeds of Western governments in the Middle East and the complicity of the media and academic establishments, I lost faith in the second line of argument. Europe is ill, and the latest events, the migration crisis, the rape epidemic, Rotherham and the terror attacks in Western cities, are just the symptoms of a sickness that goes deeper. In the same time, in the eastern side of the continent, there is still a strong admiration for the West, and our elites over here are using this to drum up support for the same kind of European values, so-called, that are destroying Europe right now. And at least in my country, they have been quite successful. As you can imagine, when I took notice of this Western political movement called the alt-right, I started to listen. And it could almost be something promising except for the way it treats the question of race. Now, before getting into the meat of the problem, let me tell you a story. Legend has it that when Rome was still a small town in central Italy, that just recently became a republic, there was a conflict between the patricians and the plebeians, the aristocracy and the common folk. The plebeians got so upset that they left the city and camped on a hill nearby. The patricians got really scared because suddenly the city was without the necessary manpower to defend itself and was exposed. So they sent a guy called Menenius Agrippa to try to persuade the plebeians to come back. Agrippa went to the plebeians and told them a story about a body in which the organs did not agree anymore, contesting the role and value of each other. But the organs soon discovered that without each other and the different roles that they have, none of them can survive. They need each other as they are. The plebeians hearing this story became more open to negotiations, and they reached an agreement with the patricians. Rome was saved. Today we are infected by individualism and collectivism, and we forgot to see the organic nature of reality. If we give in to individualism, we'll see a community as an informed collection of different people, with everyone doing his own thing. If we give in to collectivism, we'll see this collection of people defined by one overarching quality, such as class, race, gender, and the like, or a collection of different collectives, each defined by one quality. Both of these are modern concoctions. Both the radical left and the radical right have fallen prey to collectivism. On the left, we have the collectivism of different oppressed or oppressive groups, while on the radical identitarian right, we tend to define ourselves by our race. I should say at this point that the racism of a modern movement like National Socialism owes much to the theories of Ludwig Woltmann, a medical doctor and a Marxist theorist who tried to reconcile his Marxist views with the latest in Darwinian science. Modern racism is collectivist in origin and is closely linked with the scientific socialism of good old Karl. Collectivism, as I said, is about taking a group of people and defining it by one common characteristic, making everything else subservient to that one characteristic. Marxism is about class consciousness in the sense that it sees class identity as defining for a human being. National Socialism does the very same thing, but it appeals to race, while nationalism appeals to ethnicity. Contemporary social justice warriors are on the same page with race and gender because both of these are ideal to reduce people to collectives. In all these cases, collectivism is leveling. And the temptation to go collectivist is great. When you are a modern, rootless individual, a collectivist ideology gives you a simple identity through race, ethnicity, gender, or something similar. It's a minimal effort on your part, and you get an identity and sense of belonging quite cheaply. As long as you show your emotional attachment to your chosen social, racial, or gender identity, you are on the level. The only problem with collectivism is that it's a leveling ideology. And then you have individualism. Individualism is not a solution for collectivism. Individualism is the root of collectivism. When you proclaim the individual as the highest authority, then you destroy all the institutions of an organic society. Once these traditional institutions have been destroyed or are weak and delegitimized, individuals will remain without an identity and will flock to collectivist ideologies of every kind. So going back to classical individualist liberalism is not a solution. Classical individualism is the bedrock of modern collectivism. Collectivism needs an atomized society of lost individuals drifting to and fro aimlessly. Individualism is what atomizes society this way. After all, individual and atom are the very same word, and not by mere chance. Etymologically, the individual is that which cannot be divided further, while the atom is that which cannot be cut further. The difference is that the first term is Latin and the second Greek, but is the same word. And indeed, an individualist society is an atomized society, ripe for collectivism. I understand the online success of social libertarians. Once collectivism has given you an identity, it becomes an oppressive behemoth. And some people will start dreaming about individual liberties, forgetting that it was individual liberties that created the conditions for collectivism in the first place. Individualism needs collectivism as a boogeyman to assert its own righteousness in defending the individual. Collectivism needs individualism to break down all those social institutions and hierarchies of an organic society that could prevent people from devolving into an amorphous and maneuverable collective. Individualism and collectivism are feeding on each other. Between these two millstones, the traditional organic society has been grinded to a fine powder that can take any shape because it has lost any shape. This is a program of social engineering that seeks to create a new Europe through the EU, and the migrant invasion is just one more logical step. After the dissolution of the European traditional institutions, now it's time for the genetic makeup of the continent to be dissolved. The end goal is a mass of people without identity and roots that can be easily molded into something new. At least that's the project. It might not turn out this way in the end, but we have to realize that what is going on right now was long in the making. The great challenge for the reactionary right is to assume an organic identity. The general goal, I guess, is clear. The affirmation of European heritage, both genetic and spiritual. That much, I guess, is not controversial. But if we fall in the trap of collectivism or individualism, the movement is lost. It is the duty of every generation to pass on what it has received. But we have been robbed of this inheritance. Our heritage has been thrown out by those who came before us, and we have to rediscover it. There is a vast corpus of myths and legends that our ancestors were listening to around the fires in the dead of night. These legends of heroes and great deeds have been preserved in written form. They are available, and we should rediscover them. The great majority of people will not be moved by Platonic metaphysics, nor should they be. That should be the domain of those with a special calling for it. But all of us will like a good story. And these stories that were written down before modernity are free of its corruption. Through them we can create a new subculture, and then a culture that will be European in origin and pro-European in its effects. We need heroes. We already have them. Homer took care of that. The Icelandic saga writers took care of that. The Irish monks who wrote down the pagan myths of their ancestors took care of that. The writers and compilers of the Mabinogion already took care of that. And these are just examples that are better known on an international level. Our respective nations and tribes have their own stories and legends that will tell you the birth of a mountain range, the origin of a spring, or the deeds of our ancestors. The 19th century was a particularly fruitful period for the gathering of these legends, myths, and fairy tales, because many people were interested in awakening the national consciousness of their people. We have the result of their work to this day, and this should work for the awakening of a European consciousness. We should use it. The 19th century was a time of renewed interest for our heritage and a time of great self-confidence. We have there the necessary material of an authentically European counterculture. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumb up and share it with your friends. If you have observations to make, or you think that I glossed over something that should have been said, or you think that I'm simply wrong, share that in a comment box.